Hallo, liebe Zuhörerinnen und Zuhörer. Wir beenden unsere Staffel Stay Forever Spiel zum Spiel Puppen, Perlen und Pistolen, wie gewohnt mit einem Interview, und zwar mit dem Autor und Lead-Designer des Spiels, dem Australier Mark Morrison. Der stand Gunnar und mir ungefähr eine Stunde lang Rede und Antwort, und das war ein sehr interessantes Gespräch, ein sehr lebhaftes Gespräch. Er war gut gelaunt, der Mark, und hat uns viele Anekdoten erzählt. Also ich glaube, ihr werdet da interessante Erkenntnisse daraus gewinnen können. Das Gespräch mit Mark war in Englisch, aber wie gewohnt gibt es am Ende auch eine deutschsprachige Zusammenfassung. Wer nur die hören möchte, der springt jetzt also ungefähr eine Stunde nach vorne oder guckt in die Kapitelmarken, da kann man es dann direkt anspringen. Ja, das war's an der Stelle schon wieder von mir. Jetzt viel Spaß mit unserem Interview mit Mark Morrison.
Hello, I'm Gunnar. You know me. I'm here with Christian, my esteemed co-host, and I'm here with Mark Morrison, a veteran game writer and game designer with Beam Software and other studios. These days, he runs a publishing imprint dedicated to role-playing game works for D&D and Call of Cthulhu, and Campaign Coins, a company offering metal coins and accessories for board games and RPGs. But more importantly for us today is the fact that he was the lead designer and one of 3 writers for The Dame Was Loaded. Or as it's called in Germany, Puppen, Perlen und Pistolen. What exactly these roles entailed is one of the things we're curious to learn, but we'll start somewhat earlier. Hello, Mark.
Hello, it's great to be here, and I want to know if the joke works in German. Like, The Dame Was Loaded, how does that translate?
Well, that's a good point, because we had quite some discussions between the two of us about the meaning of the German phrase, but also about the meaning of the English phrase, to be honest. So maybe you can help us explain what the joke was supposed to be in English.
Well, I might actually talk about how that title came about. So I'm going to jump in before you've even asked me anything. So I got an invitation to submit a pitch for a new kind of computer game, which was going to be an FMV point-and-click adventure. And I have always loved film noir, so Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and the films of the era. And detective is such a great genre for a game because I'm literally playing a game with you. So I've been playing a game with you. I wrote a mystery 30 years ago, right? And you've only just solved it. And I love that. It's a really good genre for gameplay because, like Agatha Christie, it's a contest between the audience and the creator. So I submitted 5 pitches for games. And because I'm not an idiot, I put my favorite first. And they got stranger and stranger as they went along. And the first thing I thought of was that title, The Dame Was Loaded. It's a pun. It's a loaded gun. And also she's loaded. She's really rich. You know, so you want the money, you want the dame. So that's how it was. And so happily, Adam Lantzman, who is the managing director of Beam Software, was also a big detective fiction fan. So he picked that one and on we went. So there you go. I jumped the gun. We've started talking already. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for the explanation. And the joke completely gets lost in the German translation.
I thought it might.
The German phrase translates roughly to dames, pistols, and pearls. And don't ask us why it's pearls. I mean, there are no pearls in the game, but that's how they translated it.
Yeah, nice. No, that works. Yeah. You know what you're in for. It's what it says on the box. And you guys have probably been playing it on Steam or something, but look, that's an actual box. I don't know if you had the actual US edition. This is great on radio. I'm holding up the Australian and the American editions, and they're really fancy. So there you go.
I've never seen the Australian edition. That's the much better cover, actually. Nice.
Yeah, I like them both. So there you go. Because once upon a time, games came in boxes, not on the internet. My God.
So let's start at the beginning, before the beginning. So let's hear a bit about yourself. So where you're from, how did you grow up, how did you get into what you're doing?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Australian. I was born here and I went to high school in a country town. And in 1981, my school librarian, Miss Jones, got in RPGs in the school library. She got a copy of Traveller, which is like the classic science fiction RPG, 1980, in fact. And so that was amazing. I was like, what's this game? I can't work it out. You tell a story. I'll give it a go. So thanks to school librarians and libraries everywhere, for having the foresight. So I got into role-playing games. And you could say that my high school marks immediately began to go down, because that's true. And I was a great student of German. Like, man, I was getting A's in Form 4. And then I found Dungeons and Dragons, and I got 50% for high school German. I just scraped in because I was too busy playing D&D. So there you go.
Can't blame you. No blame here.
Indeed, if I'd found the Schwarze Auge, then, maybe it would have been a different story. So there you go. So high school of role-playing games led to a very average university career. I have failed first-year arts 3 times. I've majored in Dungeons and Dragons.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an achievement. It's like that's what they call the Bachelor of Attendance, and I didn't even manage that. So, however, I love role-playing games, and I do to this day. Getting together communally to tell a story. We use rules and dice, so we have a little framework and some chants, and I think it's a magical storytelling hobby, and I love it. We had a whole group of us, and we had university clubs, and we used to run tournaments, and we basically trained ourselves to write professionally. And so then I approached Chaosium, publisher of Call of Cthulhu, and said, hey, we're doing some stuff. Do you want it? And they said, sure. So Penny, my partner, Penny Love, she's also one of the co-writers of The Dame. We were published, I think, in 87, age 22, for our book Terra Australis. And so we were writing role-playing games. And also, of course, playing some computer games. My friend introduced me to Secret of Monkey Island, and that was so fantastic. And everything I know about what I know about writing role-playing games and what I needed to know about writing computer games, I learned from Ron Gilbert. That's still a magical, magical game. And then, because life is stupid, a friend of mine was working at Beam Software as an artist, and he and I had done some art for Chaosium. We had the Michael Moorcock license back in the day, and I was the editor of the Stormbringer and Elbrick line. His name was Gustav Bjorksten, and he did this amazing, incredibly dark art. It was so great. I haven't seen him for a while. He goes and works on a computer game company, Beam Software. Very famous Melbourne company. I'm sure you know more about them than I do, I bet. But we're talking The Hobbit. We're talking Way of the Exploding Fist, like these legendary games. But in particular, Phil Mitchell, genius of programming, who created those things, and Fred Milgram, who was the founder of the company. So they were doing their thing, and they had developed technology to run full motion video off a single speed CD-ROM. Now, I am talking to you online via video camera. This is some severe science fiction shit. Back in 1994, oh my God, we can actually run decent video. 320 pixel kind of, resolution. Amazing. This is the future. Running it on a single speed CD-ROM on a computer. And that was the technology that made Fred go, we want to do a point and click adventure game, but we want to film it with real people. So Gus Bjorksten knew me. My friend Darren Bremner, who I'd played Dungeons and Dragons with in high school and had barely seen since, here's the boss saying, we need a new writer. And he goes, oh, I know a guy. And so I get contacted. Oh, do you want to write a computer game? It's like, I don't know. I guess I'll try it. That's a very long anecdote to say that if you play D&D in high school and flunk out, it can work out for you. You've just got to play the long game. So follow your dreams. Lazy is good. That's my background.
So you pitched these concepts, these 5 concepts, which you mentioned earlier. I guess the first one was taken then?
It was. That was really good. And what was remarkable about this project, and it never happened again, was that every step of the way, all the ideas started with me. So it's astonishing to me, that title, almost the first thing I thought of, The Dame Was Loaded. That became the title of the game. We shipped with that. That never happened again. Like, I then spent I was 94, it was 17 years in computer games, and that never happens. Usually these decisions are made, there's a license. So that was cool. The other thing that worked out well in this project is I kind of knew instinctively or learned or made up. And the other thing about being old is you then make mistakes you got right 30 years ago, which is really depressing. But anyway, we'll move on. I just wrote one paragraph. It'll be kind of like this. And they said, oh, that's pretty good. Why don't you give us a page? And so I wrote a page. The story will be kind of like this. And I said, okay, that's great. Now, why don't you break down the whole plot, how it will play out? And that was 12 pages. And it'll be kind of like this. And I said, okay, great. So everything was kind of approved. And there were milestone payments. and I was paid $25,000 Australian to write this game. And I thought I'd knock it over in 3 months. And if you prorate that, $100,000 a year in 1994, fantastic. Except, of course, I didn't take 3 months. I took 18 months. So ended up making less than I was making in the game store that I'd worked at. But, however, lifelong career, totally happy, things worked out. But anyway, that's a little tip for the freelancers about milestone payments. Know how long you take to do shit. So we pitched the idea, and step by step, we grew it out until we were confident. And the other thing I want to say is that they had developed the engine. They knew it would be point and click. They had the cursor working. They had what I call the verbs all working. We can inspect things. We can pick them up. We can give them to people. We can talk to people. So I was given all that engine. So I was just the writer. And as far as designer goes, it was designing puzzles, but not the way the game actually functions. So that was great. I knew exactly what I could do. I'd played Monkey Island. I'd read detective stories. I'd play role-playing games. So I kind of had everything I needed to get going. So, yeah.
So just to make sure that I understood you correctly, you were at that point not employed by Beam Software. You were freelancing.
That is correct. I was, and forever was. We finished The Dame Was Loaded, and I went on to some other things, and then came back as a full-time employee when in 98, doing a game called Death Cars, which is fantastic. You should look it up. It has 4 typos in the name. I think the name is 8 characters long, and there are 4 typos in it. Like, that is fantastic. I hang my head in shame. We tried to get that changed, but we couldn't. So, yeah, I went back full-time for Beam Melbourne House in 98. Onfagrom bought them in 99, and they became Onfagrom Melbourne House. And then they became Atari in 2004, which is pretty funny because a lawyer found the Atari trademark at the bottom of a filing cabinet and said, we could be Onfagrom, a French name nobody can pronounce or spell, or we could name ourselves after a brand with the recognition of Coke. Let's do that. Anyway, now I've jumped ahead because this is non-linear, baby. That's the way we game designers roll.
Like your game. And before you wrote that pitch for The Dame Was Loaded, had you done any design work for computer games, or was that your first one?
I had no idea computer games were being made in Australia. To this day, people are surprised. You folks switched on. I know you're retro. I don't know where you came in. Like, were you playing The Hobbit on a Spectrum? And is that you going back in the day? Were you playing games that came on cassette tapes?
On the C64, not the Spectrum, but yes.
64, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So you were aware of Melbourne House?
Yeah. We played The Hobbit in 86 or something.
Yeah. So I had no idea that was going on in my town. I'm sitting here in Melbourne to this day. So it was a delightful surprise. And what was even more delightful is that it was this professional career that I'd actively and lazily trained for 10 years. And so arrived out of nowhere. And that was really cool. They knew exactly what they were doing. When I walked into Melbourne House, there were 60 or 70 people arranged in teams of about 4 to 8 people doing a lot of 8-bit and 16-bit games. They just finished Shadowrun on the NES, which is an extraordinary game. And they were doing Radical Rex and all kinds of platformers, and they were doing conversions for the 3DO. So it was a real hive of activity, lots and lots of teams making these games. And it blew my mind to walk in and see all that going on. They were making True Lies for the Sega Mega Drive. And there's some funny stories about that game and its cheat codes. It was amazing to me to walk in and see, oh my God, I had no idea. There's like a professional outfit full of outrageous nerds and wonderful creative people, some of whom I'm friends with to this day. It was really cool.
So speaking of Beam Software, a couple of years later, in 1997, you wrote an article for Animation World magazine called Multimedia Down Under. And in that article, you describe Beam Software as a company where the degree of diversity borders on the ludicrous. And diversity here means the diversity of products, because at that point they had apparently an HTML editor in the works and a facial motion capturing package, and they even ran their own motion capturing studio. And of course also games. So that seemed a little bit unfocused.
Look, Fred Milgram is a genius fella, and he's in that category of entrepreneur where he just kind of gets the idea. And for him, now I don't know the deep history of Melbourne House. Many people do. But with Phil Mitchell as the programmer and Adam coming along, Adam is the genius salesman who would just get on a plane and spend 2/3 of the year away because we had to convince people we're in Australia and we were just always on. Don't think you can't work with Australians because I'm right here in your country and I'll get up in the middle of the night and talk to you. So they had this tremendous energy. But it's my theory, and I should ask Fred this because, this is just my theory, that he was always kind of chasing for that hobbit. Like he'd been to the mountain and back again. He'd found Smaug's gold, and I think he always wanted to be the first again. And I think actually the game was loaded. Full motion software, because we felt at the time that our computer games were good and all, but, you didn't get the empathy and the emotion that we get from seeing a human face, from seeing wonderful acting, from seeing a story that way. We were wrong, but it's what we thought, and now we have The Last of Us and we know that games can be emotional and brilliant. But at the time we thought, it's a little pixel, and I think that does a dreadful disservice for the wonderful writing in Shadowrun. It's amazing what 30 years of perspective will give you. But full motion video, that was going to be the new technology. And then I think famous motion capture. The really funny, weird, sad story is that also in the late stages of Melbourne House, just before Onfogram bought it, they came up with this idea of hot games, this kind of website where there's been some reviews and you could download demos. And hotgames.com was sold for $8 million. Is this ludicrous amount of money for a .com, literally for a URL, with no disrespect to the clever people that were doing a really vibey site with a nice look. But the money for that was so out of proportion with what the studio was sold for. Is crazy. I find that life is so strange. Here's Fred going facial motion capture, full motion video, The Hobbit, brilliant ideas. And then there's, come up with a website, call it Hot Games. And that just turns into this massive sleeper hit. Anyway, so did I have a topic? I'll get back on the topic. What was your question?
No, that's fine. Actually, speaking of money, I'm curious because in that article I mentioned in the Animation World, which is quite well written, actually, you basically describe a number of funding options that in 1997 exist for multimedia projects, like government-funded enterprises. So there seemed to be a lot of money around multimedia in Australia at that point. And we wondered whether The Dame Was Loaded, which was a couple of years earlier, actually benefited from that in some way. So was there some amount of government-backed funding?
Yep, absolutely, 100%. I was paid by Film Victoria. We got Film Victoria grant to develop the script. It was a really forward-thinking time in Australia. We had Paul Keating as a Prime Minister. We were kind of embracing the notion that actually Australia is closer to Asia than it is to Europe. We should be kind of broadening our own horizons. We should be a smarter country. We should be less of the old sheep farmer, a bit more of a modern outlook. So there was this really kind of exciting time in the arts. And so Victoria was behind it. And that was a lot of the excitement of The Dame Was Loaded. It was the largest multimedia production ever. The shooting budget was about $250,000, which was, a substantial kind of amount. But more to the point, we got the most extraordinary kind of director and cameraman and the props crew and the costuming. It was all absolute first class because everyone thought, wow, multimedia, that's going to be the next thing. I want to get in right now and find out all about it. And so we all had a fantastic time. It was not the next thing, but it was a thing. But I can cut forward to right now. Film Victoria is huge with supporting computer games. There are grants every year. A friend of mine just got a grant. I was just super excited about it. PAX Australia is held in Melbourne. We have Melbourne Games Week. So there's a real wonderful kind of energy from our state government to say, make your games in Melbourne, make them in Victoria. And I think when governments do say, hey, this is creativity, this is something to support, this is employment, then you get really good results.
Let's get back to the actual making of the game. So you were then assigned to one of these teams that you mentioned, these 4 to 8 person teams. So how did you work with them? Did you walk to the physical office? Did you work from home? Who did you report to?
To begin with, I would kind of write at home, just coming up with basic ideas. But then once we got going, I would be in there because we would be implementing it. So I was reporting very much to Adam Landsman. Like I say, he was the managing director. And Adam, rest his soul, he passed away We have an award named after him, a kind of a pioneer award every year in recognition of the kind of nurturing he did for the industry locally. So on you, Adam. Thanks for everything you did for me. Adam would voraciously read and give feedback about the story. He was absolutely in. My wonderful friend Craig Jutterbuell was already working as a game designer and writer in the company, along with Ian Malcolm and Paulie Kidd, that is her name. She actually wrote the Discworld computer game, the first of the Discworld games, which is a tremendously funny script. So there was amazing kind of talent in the building, and I was like really lucky to be kind of in amongst that. But they needed somebody else because there's a lot of writing to be done. So the first thing was to develop the bones of the game. We didn't need the dialogue. We needed to prove that all the puzzles worked. John Siegliff was the artist, and he just basically did pencil sketches of all the scenes that I wrote. So every shot you see in the game, every location is basically a still. And I would just write out the script. Okay, well, here's what needs to be in each of these locations. And John would draw them, and he would make sprites of them so that everything that you pick up and take away in the game could be removed, put in your inventory. The inventory worked, the notebook worked, and we play tested it because I'm a role-playing game guy. With my friends, we bought them pizza, and we used index cards and a whiteboard. And I said, okay, what do you do? And I could describe, like they'd say, I talked to Carol about this, I talked to Angela about that. Oh, they didn't talk to Angela. She was dead. Angela's your dead girlfriend. He's so morose. Cheer up, Anger. Jesus, man, get over it. So we could play the whole game just by describing the action and using index cards. And when they tried to get creative, we set this on fire with the petrol. I say, no, you can't do that. These are the items. This is what you can do. I've got the puzzle worked out. But, of course, they would have clever ideas. And I think, that's a really clever combination of those items. Let's put that in the game. And I think all good games are tested as soon as you can and in every way you can. So programming, we had Richard Crane and Adrian Thewlis. Adrian Thewlis was the genius programmer that was basically writing all the video. And then the game was split across 2 CDs, and they always knew what the file size would be of all the photos and the video and how much you can pack onto a CD-ROM. These were hard physical limitations. So literally the plot was split into CD1 and CD2. And I've been reading reviews ever since you guys popped up into my life, and people really hate that time limit. I bet we're going to talk all about the time limit, but I will get into that now and say a lot of it was to do with the fact that I couldn't let you get onto CD2 because that's got all this different stuff. We're going to flush a lot of things from CD1. There's places you're never going to go. I can't have those movies and stuff kicking around. So I'm going to gate you that there's places you can go to on CD2. You can't, once you leave CD1, you're that. So I had to guarantee in the plot that once you move forwards, you couldn't go back while giving you some freedom. So it was a technical limitation. So we had Wayne Simmons, who used to play in a band with his mates called Blame the Dog, which I think is incredibly funny, and Stephen McNamara, who's wrote Horses. Computer gamers are wonderful people. They're musicians. They're creatives. They've got incredible brains, and everybody has all these kind of facets to them. So the pencil sketches were scanned, and the game was completely playable. And then, of course, we were starting to write the script. And for the writing of the script, we had Craig there on staff, and Craig is so funny. He's unbelievably funny. So the funniest locations, like the diner, that is all Craig. He's just hilarious. Penny, I'd written with Penny a lot on the Call of Cthulhu stuff, and I said, Penny, can you please come in and write all the women? Because I want them to sound like women and think like women and not my idea. So Penny wrote Frankie and Carol and, of course, the Dame Louise. So that's all Penny's writing. And then I'd edit it and mush it all together so it all makes sense and check the continuity. But we were able, because we knew the game worked, okay, you're writing these scenes in these locations, and here are your subjects. So every character, literally, you're writing the lines for everything they know at every point in the story. So there's things you can't talk to Carol about, you can't talk to Frankie about because you don't know them yet. But you can go back and visit Frankie and say, hey, I've just found this piece of evidence. What do you think of that? And she will answer that. So we had to write in this kind of nonlinear fashion. But we were really confident with our outline. We were confident with our gameplay. And then we got all the staff to read a part each so that all the characters would sound different. God help us all if that version of the Dame ever hits YouTube. It is horrible. It is, oh, you're back? Oh, it's nice to see you again. What are you doing here? It's so bad, right? But you could play it and you could hear the dialogue and you could follow the story, and then the QA department could start to play it. And they go, QA are testing for many things. They're like, well, I couldn't put the spanner in the forklift. But they're also saying, gee, I really wanted to do this. I really had this idea. I go, that's really clever. Oh, I got to write that in. So I've probably gone a lot further than you were hoping for, but these were the steps. And it's all about being confident that you've got what you think is a good game, a good mystery, a good story, and you can hear the lines. And once you hear them, you go, oh my God, that's awful. I'm changing that one. No one can see this on radio, but every time I say changing, I do this cat at a keyboard kind of thrashing of typing. So yeah, that was that.
So your role was like being a staff writer, fleshing out small pieces, we need the description for that and everything like that. And you had creative direction over the writing because you were checking continuity and coordinating the other writers. Is this both correct? It's a broad role, especially for somebody so young.
It astonishes me. I was so fortunate and so trusted. And I think I was young and a bit stupid. And I had this mad energy. And it was really exciting. And it was also terrifying because the juggernaut that was approaching us was shooting day. We knew that when we got onto actual film sets with actual cameras, now we didn't have mad amounts of Photoshop. We couldn't edit video. We were going to get one shot at everything. Like we could do some takes, but, and then we'd bring the actors back into a recording booth to do all the voiceover lines. But we knew that basically that was it. So we were working our guts out to just make everything as good as possible before the day, because it was easy to change before we shot it and really hard to change after. So we really wanted to make it really cool. And I think because of the complexity of a non-linear story, I think because of my Call of Cthulhu experience, I was easily able to hold in my head and go, oh, the implication of this and this plus this is fine. In fact, what happened was when they worked with a wonderful film production called Vixen Films. Jo Lane was the director. She'd done a wonderful documentary about Australian television, and now she's a fine artist. So, clever people are clever. They're just always clever. They will find out. So, love Jo, and she's so wonderful with the actors and the vision she had. So, they got involved, and we actually shot one scene. We shot the scene where you go to the dame's apartment, and she gets angry and kicks you out with a whole different dame. So it wasn't the final dame that was cast. And so in the same way that we were preparing for the gameplay, Vixen were preparing for what works on film. And they go, wow, we've got to have the lipstick in this shade of color. We can't have this kind of pattern because it will strobe like crazy. Like it'll look really bad. I remember the lipstick point. There's a great documentary. I don't know if you can see it. There was an ABC television show called Hot Chips. And they actually did a little movie about us making this thing. It's not on YouTube, but I'll see if it turns up. And Jo said, because even though it was full motion video, you had a limited palette, 256 colors or whatever. And if your palette in the scene was too wide, it would just lose its shit trying to use the colors. So literally lipstick would turn green if the scene was too colorful. So they learned literally how to film for like a 256 color palette. Now I'm just making up technical details. I'm probably getting it wrong, but it had to be compressed. It had to run smoothly. So they were learning technically what would look good on film, and also how to place the camera, how to shoot in first person, have the actors talk to camera, which is not a thing they do. They're trained not to do. Now they're looking down the barrel of the camera, because we always knew it would be a first-person game. We wouldn't show you Scott Anger. You would be Scott Anger. Assuming you're a white male who's an alcoholic American, yeah, you were Scott Anger. And there is actually a 1948 film called The Lady in the Lake, where they shot a Raymond Chandler story in first person. The whole film is in first person. And Jo watched this and she was amazed where they got that camera and how they shot the thing. Whereas at least like we had kind of a fairly chunky kind of video camera. It's a pretty bad film. Don't make films in first person. They're a bit shit. It also has one of the most wrong lines, like, did you just say that? Oh my God, that's bad. But hey, the 1940s, they live life differently there. And you don't see Raymond Chandler, like the detective Philip Marlowe, until about the last shot you see him in a mirror. So we had little nods. We'd show you his shadow every now and then, and you'd always be seeing his hand. And every time you see his hand come out to pick up a shaving brush, you've got to remember the actor and the cameraman being very intimate, being very close, because he's literally filming right over his shoulder as he's doing all this sort of stuff. So those were all the preparations leading up to shooting day. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was Vixen Films, a brilliant producer called Stuart Menzies, looks at all the locations, looks at all the actors and says, here's the budget. And Fred and Adam go, no, it's not. And they came to me, and David Giles had joined by then. David, my dear friend, and David's gone on and worked on the recent God of War, and now he's back here working with Tantalus. So David is a tremendous producer, and this was his first game. He came from a film background. He worked on Labyrinth. He fell into the swamp. You know the swamp in Labyrinth? He fell into it. That's his claim to fame. He was working at Pinewood for the summer. He has a demolitions license. He knows how to blow things up. Like I said, David is great. But he came and he's freaking out because all of this pressure of we've got one chance to shoot this. It's on you. So me and David get the command, you've got to cut the game by 1/3, right? We've literally got to take 1/3 of the story out right now. And that's my role-playing thing. It's like, oh, okay, well, this minor character, that plot line, or this line of clues, snip, 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 stitch it back together. It was fine. And the game's better for it.
So what did we miss?
Bugger if I can remember. It was all bad. You didn't miss anything.
Okay.
Just probably a few extra steps in clue trails, really. I don't remember. The other thing I learned on this and that it served me well is to be kind of okay, we can do that designer. If you're no, it's bad. The game's broken. It'll be terrible. What you do instead, you're told, cut the game by 1/3. You go, okay, I'll think about that. You go to another house and go, okay, can we do this? And then you come back to the professional, oh yeah, it's easy, we're doing this and this. And it was really funny. I remember one thing I wanted to cut and Fred said, you're not cutting that bit. That's my favorite. So having been told to cut some things out, some things went back in because Fred liked them and whatever Fred wanted, Fred got.
Is that the point where you changed the protagonist's name to Scott Anger?
No, I think he was always Scott Anger, actually.
Is there a story to the name?
He was actually Scott Anger in that first paragraph. He was always Scott Anger. I just wanted some default male name that was really boring, but kind of edgy, Scott Anger. What's he angry about, So he was always Scott Anger, yeah. Like Philip Marlowe, who's the Dashiell Hammett guy? Oh, God, that's embarrassing. It'll come back to me. Sam Spade.
Since you mentioned that Alfred Milgram always gets what he wants, in what way was he involved in the game, in the making of the game?
He was just tremendously, to me, benevolent. Hi, Mark, how you going? He was a flashy dresser. He was super nice, really supportive, and really keen about it. He really wanted to succeed. But also, he and Adam are running a company, and companies make money. And I only found this recently, kind of grinding David, get it done, make it work. That's your budget. So all that sort of stuff that has to happen. And there is a tension between art and commerce. And I remember at the time with Wired magazine, there was a studio, I think they were called Rocket Science, and Ron Cobb was doing direction for them. They did Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. And the idea of this studio was what if you got brilliant people? Like Ron Cobb, we're talking about the guy who did Conan and I think Bits of Alien, tremendous designer. What if you got the best talent of the world and gave them all the money and gave them a fridge full of designer mineral water? Won't they make great stuff? And no, they didn't. They average things and stopped because there was no pressure. There was no tension. Now, I'm not saying crunch your teams. That's horrible. But there is this, deadlines and money and get it done. Sometimes it brings out your best and sometimes it crushes your soul. Anyway, don't work crunch. Crunch is bad. Anyway, that was Fred. I like Fred. Fred was good to me.
How was the decision made to do this in first person?
I think that was there from the get-go. I can't answer that exactly. Either I said we do it first person because the Raymond Chandler novels are, or no, I think you've got me there. That's really interesting. I don't think I still have that first paragraph. I might have written this game is in first person, but it just seemed natural.
Let me specify, is this a pragmatic or an artistic choice?
It was artistic. Yeah. It's a really interesting point. I wish I remembered clearly. I bet David would remember. I think we wanted you to imagine what Scott Anger looked like and to kind of be him. Again, if you're a white male American, to kind of be there with his story. I don't know if there was ever a discussion of actually seeing people in two-shot. Because once we locked into that, it's first person all the time, then we had all these laws of camera movement. And again, Jo was really clever. She had to go, well, I can't cut like normal and I can't control what the continuity will be from point to point. So every time she frames, she's close in on a face when they're talking to you because she knows the player is then going to do their own cut back to the wide scene. And when the video starts running, we get in at a kind of a mid shot because from that mid shot, you might go to a close up of a face or you might go out to a scene. So what we worked out with the demo is you never want that little jar where the camera settles and then everything kind of pixel glitches into its position. So we always shot the video and shot the stills in such a way. And this was another great theme, continuity. We really wanted smooth continuity, that the game would never go back on itself. It was a living world. You never felt the artificial walls. So I don't know how I got to this. I honestly hadn't thought of that. You got me going. It was always going to be first person, and that was just the way it worked out.
So you had all of the game design and the engine production, etc., going on at Beam and the film production at Vixen. But what's the connection between the two? How did that collaboration actually come to be?
Adam and Fred and David just talked to production companies and they liked Jo and Stuart and they went with them. And they'd done a lot of advertising. So they were just smart, clever people. So they were freelance too. Everybody on that shoot was a contractor for the 3 weeks. So they came up. They then did all the location scout. Melbourne is an amazing city because we're a goldfields town. So much money came through Victoria in the 1850s and they built these amazing kind of buildings and laneways. So we have all this 1940s look and stuff and beautiful interiors like old courthouses. So all these amazing buildings that could be dressed and shot for the period and all the laneways and things. So everything you see is in Melbourne. But obviously, we're trying to pretend it's Los Angeles. But, they're shooting films in Melbourne to this day. Ghost Rider is shot in Melbourne. That's not a recommendation, but there you go. There it is. So they did the location scout and we saw all the photos of where the places would be. And then it was go time. And so I was on set for every day for 3 weeks, getting up in the morning.
And did you participate in the casting?
I believe where there were recordings of their voices. I don't recall making the decision, but I know I was made aware of who they were and got to listen. I might have had some opinions, but that all happened. There was so much going on and I'm super happy with everyone we had. We had some superstars of Aussie TV, both current and yesteryear. Gus Mercurio, who plays the old donut-eating cop. I watched him as a kid. He's the original hard man of kind of this American who'd come to Australia who's always the crime guy or the tough cop. He was in this kind of Goldfield series. He was great. Tiffany Lamb, who plays Carol Klein, was huge on Neighbours. She's an absolute huge Neighbours star. And she was cast because you really wanted someone that you'd bond with, you'd have an emotional attachment with. So she was tremendous. And others, I keep seeing them pop up here and there on Aussie TV. Still getting the work. Good on you, mate. And they were utterly perplexed because the script made no sense. You just do their emotion and be like, now I'm angry, now I'm loving you. What's going on? I don't get it. And they reading these things, it just made no sense, but everyone was game. But I, of course, was a maniac and I was rewriting the bloody game every night because, oh my God, we've got one chance, I've thought of another line. So the script was getting all these green pages added. And in the second week, the producer took me away in the nicest way and said, Mark, it's really hard on the actors if you change the script overnight. So can we minimize that? He said it in the nicest way, but, it didn't stop me. But David and I were there to make sure that the continuity was right, because we knew we couldn't do it again. So every take had to suit the needs of the gameplay. And we were very careful with any moving picture shot that nothing was in frame that you might have in your pocket. Like, I don't think there's any point in that game ever when you see something in the video that you know you've picked up. Like, we worked really hard on that. And then there'd be a point after we'd done all the shot that we'd do this kind of bomb disposal shot of we'd do the still frames and we'd put every item that you could remove, and it was all beautifully lit and all separated so that we could cut it out with the pixels. It'd all be just so. It'd be like, quiet on the set, nobody move. You know, you want anybody bouncing. And then you take the photo, and then somebody would come in, I imagine them with cotton gloves, but very carefully, without bumping anything, take out all the things that you could remove and take the photo, because we couldn't relight things. We couldn't have the shadows. Like, this is primitive stuff, man. We could easily cut a big round ring about something. It's there, it's not there. So none of the shadows could overlap of the objects. Everything had to be spaced out. And where David utterly lost his mind was the forklift puzzle, where you put the cutlery in the forklift to get it going. And you could put the fork here or the knife there or the spoon there. And David was going, we might get it wrong. And I was like, no, David, it's fine. I've worked out all the combos. Have you? And he had this little notebook called his Little Book of Worry. Either I volunteered to sign it or he made me sign it. I actually signed it. Dear David, the forklift puzzle will be okay. Mark Morrison, my signature with the date. And I think he would have beat me to death with that book. But surprise, it was okay. We got all the shots we needed. But that said, we still did add things after the fact. One of the endings is what I call the Blade Runner ending. There's one happy ending where you actually go away romantically happy. And there's footage of trees like you're in a car driving. That footage was shot for something else. And I went, oh my God, this game's so depressing. Let's write a happy ending. So we can do it with voiceover. And so we got a bit of found footage and bunged that in. It's one of the endings. There's one good ending out of 9.
Were there any accidents on set during those 3 weeks? Any temper tantrums from an actress or actor?
Look, they were just totally fantastic. I did in later years work on a licensed game where an actor tried so hard to get out of it. But no, we had them on a contract, so they did it. It's someone I respect and admire, and I can see why they tried to get out of it, but they couldn't. And that said, when they turned up, they were very nice and super professional and nailed their lines. But by God, they didn't want to do it. No, everyone that I recall was great. I was the maniac. There is a photo of me on set in which I just move when the photo is taken. I'm literally a blur. And Jo loves the photo because she says, that's exactly what you were like. You didn't stay still. And there was this ridiculous moment. I said, oh, the apartment's been trashed. There should be broken glass on the floor. So the props guy got broken glass and effing set. There's broken glass on the floor now because the designer thought it would be needed. You can't see that. It's glass. It's transparent. I made the set dangerous because I thought it would be cool. So, no, the only maniac was me, really. But I love the props guy. He taught me a secret of being in props. It's the director says, oh, have we had this? And he'd always say, it's in the truck. And then he'd walk slowly out the door and then he'd go, and like run and solve the problem. And then so he could come back in like everything was under control. But no, I don't recall anything going wrong. But I do know, and I can't tell you what they are. Once we get into location, we go, oh my God, look at this thing. This thing's really cool. Like, let's shoot it this way. Let's have this. Because once you get onto a location, there are things that you get for free that you didn't plan. I don't know if we wrote any puzzles about that. We probably wrote some of the voiceover lines, like he'd just be describing some shit in the scene that was just there.
Just to be sure, was everything shot on location? Or did you have a studio set up?
No, studios cost money. Have a studio. But that said, like Louise's apartment, they just got hold of this amazing kind of like Art Deco looking apartment that somebody let us use. Sometimes it was an actual place, like the police department was in Old Melbourne Jail. I think that's where that setup was. I don't recall exactly where we were for different things. So they were really nice locations that we could use, but they would come in and they'd move out all the modern shit and they'd dress the set. So we'd dress sets, but we were only there for kind of half a day and then off we'd go. Some things like the laundry might have been completely faked, like we'd kind of build a set in somewhere else we were doing things. But mostly they were kind of interesting places.
So now that all of this effort went into that game, and to be honest, it turned out pretty nice.
Thank you.
The question is, how successful was the Dame Was Loaded?
Well, here's the thing. So I haven't talked about Philips. Philips Media, the Netherlands company, they had developed the CDI machine. And what the CDI was brilliant at, more so than any of the other next-gen consoles of the times. We had PlayStation 1, we had Sega Saturn, we had the CDI, we had the 3DO. They're all coming out. Who would reign supreme? And Philips had the best video player. And they wanted people to buy these things, to watch movies on discs, and they wanted a game that was filmed that looked really good on disc. So they bankrolled it. They were the publisher. So we came out on CDI, we came out on PC, and we were supposed to come out on Mac. There are 2 copies of the Mac game in the world. Philips claimed it was released, but it was never released. And what happened was by the time it came out, the CDI wasn't doing so well, so they went back to making light bulbs. So that kind of, we're going to do a game, maybe not. That wave was cresting, but thanks for them, they paid for it. And the other thing that happened is we discovered that everybody knows gamers hate full motion video games because they think the gameplay is bad and it's primitive and it's not linear and you can't do anything. So I worked so hard for continuity and puzzles. We tried to do Monkey Island on film. We gave it our best shot, but people hated the medium before we got there. Like they just go, oh, FMV. Oh, that's terrible. So people had decided it was terrible. Now, admittedly, there are things about the game that are terrible, but it was not a popular medium. And I remember we'd always have beers in the studio at 5:00 on a Friday, as is good and proper, beer and chips, and everyone would hang out and we'd talk. And I remember there's Adrian, genius kind of full motion video coder, and Richard, lovely bloke, went on to found his own kind of company, and they were playing this game. And I thought, wow, what's that? That's really cool. And I think it was Fade to Black, which is the precursor of Tomb Raider. Yeah, am I right? Something like that.
The sequel to Flashback. I'm not sure whether it's the precursor to Tomb Raider, different company.
Okay, but it's before Tomb Raider. And what was amazing about that was that it's not Wolfenstein, it's a person running around and the camera's whipping around. And I looked at that and thought, wow, that game's cool. Without kind of knowing, I was the dinosaur in the shadow of the meteor. Like 3D graphics are coming along, Wipeout's coming along. Suddenly you get these immersive 3D worlds where you can whip the camera around, and that was the hotness. And then, Tomb Raider did come out. We were working on dev cars. So we were obsolete before we were published, but we all enjoyed it. We got paid. The thing came out. So, not a commercial success, arguably not a critical success, but man, I loved it, so proud of it. And it's so great that you found this thing and played it through. That's neat. There was a sequel. There was going to be a Dame Was Loaded too, and it was going to be called String of Pearls. And we started writing the story. So that the Pearl thing, it really was there. I think we got some seed funding for that. So we started writing the script, but Philips decided not to publish anymore. So that was the end of that. But I got paid to do some sequel works. There you go.
So that would have been another Scott Anger story?
Yep. That's why it's called on the box a Scott Anger mystery. Because we thought there were going to be several of them, It was supposed to be the start of a series, but, there you go. So there you go. That's a bombshell for you. Stick that on the Wikipedia page.
Excellent.
This might be a good time to mention that I've played FMV games, obviously, like everybody, but they all have terribly aged from a modern perspective. But the Dame Was Loaded, not so much. Because of the first-person perspective, that was a good artistic choice, and because it was shot on location. And if you see now all these awkward actors in the other games before render backgrounds, that looks aged. And we thought about if you had still higher resolution material for this game, it might make a modern game in a way. So it might look still modern and playable, except for the mouse controls, perhaps, but the game itself, the puzzles and the FMV parts are holding up.
That is delightful to hear. Thank you so much. And that's a credit to, again, the brilliant and wonderful film company. The other thing is we got again, top people who really wanted to be part of this thing. So they were kind of in a way working for like a little bit cheaper in a way because they wanted to be there. They kind of wanted to do that. And so it looked good. We have brilliant filmmakers here, so it has that look. It's beautifully lit. The lighting, I forget who's the lighting guy. And it's also got wonderful music, Marshall Parker. It's got the jazz music. Craig got to write the lyrics for the theme song. So tremendous talent. And then anything in the gameplay is a credit to the testers, everybody who made it better, like writing again from Penny and Craig. And Monkey Island, man. Like that game is perfect. If you did it like Monkey Island, you're not too far wrong, you know. And this other weird choice to have absolute continuity. And the other thing I didn't want is I didn't want anyone to ever repeat something unless it was very matter of fact. If I could avoid it, and you tell me, we didn't want everyone to see the same film thing again unless it was the kind of thing that could happen twice in life. Sometimes he'll look at things, he'll say a gag, and then he'll just say the name of it so you don't feel like you're in this kind of loop. So we just did our best to make you feel like you're living in a world. And, you know, you had the travel time for all the locations and the clock is ticking. And again, it's got this completely stupid and arbitrary, you got 3 days to solve the case. That's because you're going to fall off the back of CD1 and I'm not going to let you get to CD2 unless you know enough. Like you've got enough clues to come through so that I can flush all that plot. And it's really funny. My friend Kathy Mueller, who's a film director, I said, hey, Kathy, can you play this game in the pencil sketch version? And she hears, okay, you got 3 days to make your rent. And she just immediately clicks on the door. Boom, she's out of there. Like starts in the office, like, all right, go. You might want to look in the office. There's some things you might need. Like game designers should never do that, never interrupt the test. But she said, hey, I've got 3 days. I'm in a hurry. It was a real eye-opener. You know why there's 3 days. You know how the game works, but you forget about the emotional impact on somebody. So thank you for that lovely comment. And I think that's really the skill of everybody involved to really try as hard as they could to make it cool. That's great.
I'd like to second what Gunnar said and maybe expand on it a little bit because ultimately we were quite happy with the game and the game experience. And that's partly due to the seamless style that it retains till today, which we really liked. But it's also due to gameplay decisions and also story decisions. I mean, we've played quite a lot of these ancient games, which for one reason or the other, not really make it to the top of the best games list. And often they are flawed in some way. And often the flaw is also in the storytelling because typically they have nice premises, but then they don't come through. And the Deimos Loaded does come through. We really liked how the story neatly ties little bows around all of the key secrets, the key questions. So we went out of the game and really felt satisfied with how the story was resolved and with the case. And that is not something that you see often in games.
I am so pleased. I'm moved. I mean, first of all, I'm honoured to be asked and I'm delighted you've played it. I can't wait to tell kind of Craig and Penny. I knew who was dead and why and where before I wrote the game. I mean, Agatha Christie, Chandler, you read The Big Sleep and you go, I get it. The Lady in the Lake, there's somebody in a lake, you know, and you want people to go, that's what happened. You're striving for that. So I'm really pleased that it's a story worth telling and worth playing. That's cool.
There's also an interesting interplay between the storytelling and the gameplay, and that's something that is maybe an overlooked strength of the Deimos Loaded, and that is that gameplay-wise, basically it's quite lenient. It gives you multiple solutions to puzzles, it lets you skip over entire locations and parts, and the game still continues. So basically it lets you play, apart from that gating in the middle in the transition from CD1 and 2 that you mentioned. And then on the other hand, there's all of these clues which help you as the player basically get the full picture of what happened in the past, but you can also miss them. I mean, you can reach the end gameplay-wise and have missed a ton of information that would help you piece together what happened. And I think that's a good way to do that. So you're not obstructing players, you're not handing them the solution on a silver plate, you're basically telling them, okay, look, here's this world, there's everything in there you need. We're not going to stop you if you want to rush ahead or skip that, but if you want to have the full picture, then you better look closely. That's basically detective work, I mean, in the game. That's what we wanted and that's what we got.
I'm so pleased. And it's something I was talking about earlier. It's annoying where you find out you were clever 30 years ago and you don't think you're clever now. But you've reminded me it was absolutely a goal that puzzles would have two solutions. Where possible, we'd try not to stop you unless we just totally had to. and that falling off the back of CD1. And it was so funny looking at the reviews on Steam. People hate a time limit. Fucking time limit. Of course, time limits are awful. But it was there for that purpose. But yeah, there were going to be two solutions, and we didn't want to ever bottleneck you and like, oh, well, I can't finish this now because I can't work out that one thing. And I'm pretty sure we learned that from other games, but it was something we definitely wanted to happen. And then there's just some fun, weird stuff. The fun stuff of like stuff you can nick and writing funny lines like, I'm going to give her the plate of food, or whatever. That stuff's just for free. Like, that's hilarious. That is neat. I'm pleased. And we wanted it also to be nonlinear because we wanted you to play it again. And what's really funny now is you look at it and go like people barely finish it once. But we actively, there's 9 endings. I'm going to play it again, see if I can find another ending. I'm going to hammer that escape key. I don't need to see this. I'm just playing it for the gameplay. So that was also kind of intentional. And everything in the game, I'm pretty sure every single scene is skippable. Like skip, skip, skip. I'll tell you a funny story about skipping. A colleague decided to propose to his partner. This was on another game in another studio. And he was working on the game and he said, okay, well, I'm going to put the proposal in a game character. I'm going to invite her in for the weekend and she's going to play the game. It's right at the start and it's going to be like a will you marry me moment. And so she sits down, she starts playing the game. The character appears, boom, skip. I don't want to see talking. I'm here to play. And he freaks out. No, you've got to watch this. And Rita, she said, yes, they have 2 children. It all worked out. But yeah. So nice. It was also designed for the person who hates this shit and would skip everything and it's got to hold up. That's cool. And that's why you have the notebook. Like everything's there for you. You can kind of see your inventory and review things. Yeah, cool.
Well, there is a downside to that, and that's that some players might have a feeling of that they've missed stuff, and that might be a reason for them to quit playing. But that was not something that bothered us, and also you mentioned that there was the time limit, and that was a gripe with some of the players. Didn't worry us too much. But there's one thing that I'd like to point out, even though I'm quite sure that it's not your fault. But the worst thing about the Deimos Loaded is the inventory system and the fact that you have 3 different inventories with the car and your drawer. And you also have an inventory limitation that you can only take 15 items with you. That's unnecessarily complicated, and we hated that. And the same with the save system that you have to go back to the office to save.
You're welcome.
So if you're to blame for that, then we'll gladly blame you.
Okay. Thank you. Please. No, I'm to blame for many things in life. The older you get, the longer the list. I do not recall why there was an inventory limitation. Hopefully it wasn't something stupid like, well, you can't carry all that stuff. But we had to have you come to the office. We had to have you in a fixed location because the landlord has to come through the door. And if you never go back to the office, literally the game will cease to exist. We wrote 7 days of newspaper headlines. I don't know if you noticed, but every day you click on the newspaper, there's a different headline. So we literally couldn't let you exist beyond the 7th day. At that point, we're going to kill you, or there's people going to quit town. And the landlord had to shake you down and say, where's my money? Fucking you're out. Game over. I'm only filming him. Like he can only come through that doorway. So we needed to get you back to a fixed point. We deliver things to your office. Like that's where your partner is. Like things happen. So yeah, mea culpa on the typewriter. Hey, if it's good enough for Resident Evil, it's good enough for us. I do not remember why the other thing was. I honestly don't. It might have been part of that same. And it's really interesting, the things you as a designer think, I need you back at the office because of my continuity, as opposed to, well, you could just save in the car. I'm sure we could have worked it out. Like, didn't occur to us.
You do go back to the office anyway because you have to sleep there, and also because Ralph is there and you might want to ask his opinion on the case. So you already have 2 reasons for Scott Anger to go back to the office. Didn't need a third one.
Ha ha! Well, it's 25 years ago. I can't take back. I don't recall. Like, yeah, that's right. If he doesn't sleep, he just crashes his car and dies, doesn't he? It's completely arbitrary. Isn't that what happens? Something, if you don't sleep, he literally has a prang. It's terrible. Oh.
We never tried that. The game gives you warnings when you get tired, and you don't have much to do during nights anyway, so it seems like a proper choice to just go to sleep.
I think we kill you. But anyway, good feedback. Every QA tester in the world is going, I told them, like the people who play the game in and out. And what happens to QA? QA are brilliant. They tell you what you don't want to know. and you go, no, it's by design for this reason, or we can't afford that, or you're wrong and I'm right. And sometimes you're not right. But because they're your colleagues, they kind of like you anyway, unless it's like gone really septic, and that can happen too. So I don't recall that coming up so much, but it's really interesting. And yeah, whether it was just the screen flick, I don't know why you only had 15 items. We may never know.
Christian already mentioned we didn't mind the time limit. I felt it gave structure to the game and gave you agenda and a sense of urgency, which is not bad to have in a game that's structured in days. This being structured in days made it clearer because I have 3 of those and I can see what I can achieve in a day. So I felt that was a nice touch and not hindering my pleasure at all. So all's fine on the time limit thing. All these journalists were wrong.
Can you drop a review on Steam? Because they hate time limits on Steam. But the other thing is, it literally was a different time, right? And we had more time. And so people would get a game and they would settle into it and they'd really invest. Now, Steam wishlist, you've got terabytes of shit. And you guys, you're playing backwards into the past. You're doomed. There is no way you can ever play a computer game made. So you don't give them much time. And nor should you. Do I like this show in 5 minutes? Do I like this book on the first page? Oh, somebody slaved his guts out for 18 months. Don't care. Bored now. Gonna watch a cat playing a piano on YouTube. That's just how we live now. So there would be more investment. Patton Oswalt has a great thing about D&D. Why was D&D so big in the 80s? Because we were bored shitless. We had nothing to do. So we made up stories, So that's really interesting. And also because you're journalists and you're going to devote a podcast. If you got 2 episodes in and you know what, this game's terrible. We're just going to stop now. I don't know at what point you guys hit the eject button or whether we're going to see it to the end. It's interesting. Why do we finish games? And even people will say, I'm reading this book, I hate it. Well, stop. Why read a bad book? I'm 57. I'm not going to live to read all the books I want to read. So let's spend our time doing good ones. Mortality, death, it's all coming out.
It's been a pleasure, Mark, to hear all of these stories and anecdotes, and we learned a lot. All of our questions have been answered.
Thank you, and I learned a lot too from your response, and also you've scratched my brain.
Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank an Mark Morrison für das spannende Gespräch. Und hier kommt jetzt die Zusammenfassung von dem, was wir von ihm erfahren haben. Zunächst mal zu Mark Morrison. Der ist Australier und ist dort in Victoria aufgewachsen und erzählte uns von seinem Werdegang. Wie ist er denn eigentlich in diese Situation gekommen, dass er dieses Krimi-Adventure schreiben konnte? Denn eigentlich ist seine Passion und auch seine Profession vor Puppen, Perlen und Pistolen und auch heute wieder übrigens eine andere, die liegt nämlich in den Pen-and-Paper-Rollenspielen. Und er erzählte uns, dass er im Jahr 1981, da war er noch in der Highschool, von der Schulbibliothekarin, einer Miss Jones, zum ersten Mal in Kontakt mit Pen-and-Paper-Rollenspielen gekommen ist. Die hatte nämlich eine Ausgabe von Traveller angeschafft. Und da ist er dann sofort dran leben geblieben, so sehr, dass seine Noten gelitten haben. Er erzählt, er hat in der Highschool unter anderem Deutsch gelernt und war da ziemlich gut drin, hat er lauter Einsen geschrieben. Das war vor Traveller und danach gingen die Noten runter, sodass er es gerade so bestanden hat. Auch das Studium war dann nix so rechtes. Er hat dann angefangen, Kunstgeschichte zu studieren, 3 Semester, in denen er jedes Mal das erste Semester gar nicht bestanden hat, weil er stattdessen so viel Dungeons & Dragons gespielt hat. Das wird sich für ihn noch auszahlen, denn er hat sich dann schon engagiert in diesem Bereich. Da gab es Rollenspielclubs in der Uni, da wurden Turniere ausgerichtet, wo er mitgewirkt hat und vor allen Dingen, er hat zu der Zeit mit dem Schreiben angefangen für Pen-and-Paper-Rollenspiele. Und dann ist er mit einer Kollaborateurin, Penny Love, an Chaosium herangetreten, amerikanischer Rollenspielverlag, die vor allen Dingen Call of Cthulhu im Programm hatten. Und für eben jenes Call of Cthulhu haben Penny Love und Mark Morrison dann 1987 einen Band rausgebracht. Da war er 22. Dieses Buch heißt Terror Australis, in Anspielung auf Terra Australis, also der Name des Kontinents. Damit hatten die beiden den Fuß in der Tür und Mark Morrison wurde also Autor für Chaosium. Hat nicht nur für Call of Cthulhu geschrieben, sondern auch für andere Projekte. Chaosium zum Beispiel hatte damals dann die Lizenz von den Werken von Michael Moorcock, der vor allem die Elric von Melniboné Geschichten geschrieben hat. Ich denke, dafür ist er am bekanntesten. Und Chaosium hat da Rollenspielsysteme draus gemacht, 2 Stück sogar, nämlich eins, das hieß Elric mit einem Ausrufezeichen, das andere hieß Stormbringer, und für beide war Mike Morrison der leitende Redakteur. Es war in der ersten Hälfte der 90er. Und in dieser Zeit hat er zusammengearbeitet mit einem Zeichner, Gustav Björksten, der dann 1994 für einige Zeit bei einer Softwarefirma angeheuert hat, in Melbourne, nämlich bei Beam Software. Beam Software war zu der Zeit vermutlich die bekannteste Spielefirma von Australien. Die hatten in den 80er Jahren The Hobbit gemacht und Way of the Exploding Fist, hatten damit also veritable Hits, vor allen Dingen mit dem Text-Adventure The Hobbit, und waren aber auch jetzt in den Anfang der 90er gut im Geschäft. Die hatten kurz bevor Morrison dazu kam, hatten sie zum Beispiel Shadowrun auf dem Super NES veröffentlicht. Das war 93, und 94 arbeiteten sie gerade an True Lies, also der Filmumsetzung für Super NES Mega Drive. Also wie gesagt, die standen gut im Geschäft, und Morrison kannte die Firma nicht, wusste nicht mal, dass es die gibt, und war dann einigermaßen überrascht, als er von ihnen kontaktiert wurde. Das kam nämlich so, dass Beam Software in der Zeit versucht hat, in das Full-Motion-Video-Geschäft einzusteigen. Die hatten eine Technik entwickelt, um bildschirmfüllendes Video von CD-ROM abzuspielen. Adrian Thewlis war da der federführende Entwickler. Und da reifte dann in der Firma relativ schnell der Beschluss, da ein Adventure draus zu machen. Ein Point-and-Click-Adventure, das diese Technologie nutzen sollte. Morrison hat uns im Gespräch erzählt, dass er die Theorie hat, dass der Gründer von Beam Software, / Melbourne House, wie der Publishing-Arm hieß, seit dem riesigen Erfolg von The Hobbit, das war in den frühen 80ern, diesem einen Erfolg nachjagte. Der war damals sehr früh dran in der Text-Adventure-Zeit, hatte damit einen veritablen Hit. Er hatte, wie Morrison sagt, Smaugs Schatz gefunden, und seitdem versucht er das zu wiederholen. Er will noch einmal der Erste sein, und diese Full-Motion-Video-Technologie von CD-ROM scheint damals möglicherweise das nächste große Ding zu sein. Anfang der 90er setzt sich das so langsam durch. Da findet dann auch so ein Multimedia-Boom statt, und da versucht also Beam Software draufzuspringen. Beam Software ist damals so ungefähr 60, 70 Mann stark. Die machen eine ganze Menge Sachen, Spiele, Conversions, teils Tools. Und in diesem Multimedia-Boom, da findet sich vor allen Dingen halt auch Geld. Da gibt es zum Beispiel die Firma Philips aus den Niederlanden, diesen großen Elektronikkonzern, die haben eine eigene Konsole am Start, das CDI, die kann Filme abspielen, und da finanziert Philips als Publisher dann auch Spielproduktionen. Und so kommt dann auch Geld zu Beam Software. Denn Philips steigt als Publisher ein, um dieses geplante Adventure zu finanzieren. Außerdem gibt es in Australien Fördertöpfe, die man da anzapfen kann. Da wird auf einmal die Filmförderung interessant. Das war bei uns in Deutschland ja auch nicht anders, ist bis heute nicht anders. Dass wenn das irgendwas mit Film zu tun hat, dann kann man da auf einmal Fördergelder reinholen. Und in Victoria, dem Bundesstaat, wo Melbourne liegt, da gibt's eine Filmförderung, Film Victoria, und auch die schießt Geld zu in dieses Projekt. Ja, also das scheint eine gute Business-Idee zu sein. Ja, also nun soll dieses Adventure her, aber dafür braucht man ja einen Autor, jemand, der das schreibt. Und nun kommt es, dass der Gustav Björksten, also der Grafiker, der da gerade bei Beam arbeitet, seinen Kumpel empfiehlt, den Mark Morrison. Und zufällig arbeitet bei Beam Software noch ein alter Bekannter von Mark Morrison, ein Highschool-Freund, Darren Bremner, ein Programmierer, den er seit Ewigkeit nicht mehr gesehen hat, aber der kennt den noch, den Mark Morrison, und empfiehlt ihn ebenfalls. Ja, und diese Connections führen dann dazu, dass Morrison gefragt wird, ob er Pitches schreiben kann, ob er mal Ideen einreichen möchte für dieses Adventure. Mark Morrison, muss man dazu sagen, ist zu dem Zeitpunkt also schon ein erfahrener Autor im Pen-and-Paper-Bereich, aber hat mit Spielen nichts am Hut. Der spielt zwar selber, er kennt Spiele und Adventures, er liebt Monkey Island, das ist sein Referenz-Adventure, aber er selbst hat noch nie an einem Spiel gearbeitet. Nun gut, aber er sagt da nicht Nein dazu und reicht also 5 Ideen für Spiele ein. Sein Favorit von diesen Ideen ist ein Noir-Krimi. Er selbst liebt Noir-Filme, er mag Raymond Chandler, er mag diese Literatur. Und er hat auch schon einen Namen dafür. Schon bei diesem Pitch heißt das Ding The Dame Was Loaded. Das ist ein Favorit, den legt er ganz oben auf den Stapel und der wird dann tatsächlich auch genommen. Der Name bleibt dann auch erhalten, wie wir wissen. Das findet Morrison heutzutage sehr ungewöhnlich, weil normalerweise werden solche Arbeitstitel nie erhalten, sondern das geht dann durch die Marktforschung, dann kommt irgendwas anderes raus. Aber hier war es so. Ach ja, und was bedeutet der Name eigentlich? Haben wir natürlich auch nochmal nachgefragt. Also es ist tatsächlich ein Wortspiel aus dieser Mischung aus der geladenen Pistole und aber auch einer Frau, die loaded, also reich ist. Ja, das sind die beiden Sachen, die hier zusammenkommen. Nun, und der Pitch kommt so gut an, dass Mark Morrison den Auftrag bekommt, das Spiel zu schreiben. Und er kriegt dafür 25.000 australische Dollar. Das sind umgerechnet heutzutage etwa 35.000 Euro. Und er denkt, ja, das ist ja fantastisch, das ist echt gutes Geld, das ziehe ich doch in 3 Monaten durch, da schreibe ich das Skript runter und dann habe ich einen echt guten Schnitt gemacht. Naja, am Ende sind es dann 18 Monate, denn er ist nicht fest angestellt. Also er geht nicht als Angestellter zu Beam Software, sondern er macht das als Freelancer und bekommt entsprechend also auch nur diesen fix ausgehandelten Betrag. Womit er nichts zu tun hat und auch keinen großen Einfluss hat, ist das ganze Spielsystem, die Engine. Also die Art und Weise, wie das Spiel sich bedient, die ganzen Aktionen, die Steuerung, das alles kommt vom Projektteam bei Beam Software. Damit hat Morrison nichts zu tun. Er ist derjenige, der die Story schreibt und der sich die Rätsel ausdenkt, aber nicht die eigentliche Spielmechanik. Er fand das ganz super, er wusste, woran er ist, er wusste, was die Engine kann und damit kann man auch arbeiten. Ja, und dann arbeitet er also die Spielstruktur aus. Erstmal so 12 Seiten, auf denen er aufschreibt, ja, was soll denn so grob passieren, was gibt's für Schauplätze und so weiter, wie hängt das alles zusammen. Und das wird dann immer weiter ausgearbeitet. Und der Hauptgrafiker, der ihm dazu geteilt ist, John Sicklef heißt der macht auf dieser Basis Konzeptskizzen von den ganzen Schauplätzen, die Morrison da beschreibt in seinem Konzept. Und mit diesem Konzept macht Mark dann Sitzungen mit seiner Rollenspielgruppe. Die nehmen sich Karteikarten, die nehmen sich ein Whiteboard. Mark beschreibt da die jeweilige Szene, einen Schauplatz und die vorhandenen Gegenstände und die Gruppe sagt, was sie dann da tun würden. Und in diesem Wechselspiel zwischen ihm als Autor und seiner Rollenspielgruppe entstehen dann ganz viele Entscheidungen. Entstehen viele von den Möglichkeiten, was man im Spiel tun kann, neue Ideen, wie man Gegenstände einsetzen kann und so weiter. Ja, und sobald dieses Gerüst steht, geht's dann an das Schreiben der Dialoge. Das wird aufgeteilt. Es gibt 3 Autoren an dem Spiel. Einer davon ist natürlich Mark Morrison. Aber Beam Software hat auch einen Inhouse-Autor, Designer, Craig Duturber heißt er. Und von dem stammen viele der humorvolleren Szenen, also zum Beispiel das Diner wurde von ihm geschrieben. Und außerdem bringt Morrison seine bewährte Mitstreiterin Penny Love mit an Bord. Und zwar, um die Frauenfigur zu schreiben. Die stammen also alle von ihr, Louise, Carol und so weiter. Und Morrison hat natürlich den Hut auf, er pflegt die Texte von den beiden anderen Autoren ein, er stellt sicher, dass das alles konsistent bleibt. Ja, und als das Skript dann auch noch steht, die ganzen Dialoge, dann lässt er Mitglieder des Teams diese ganzen Texte einsprechen. Und aus diesen eingesprochenen rohen Aufnahmen und diesen Konzeptgrafiken von John Sicklef entsteht damit eine spielbare Prototypversion. Also da kann man das Spiel schon vollständig spielen und kann hören, wie das Ganze klingen wird. Da ist noch kein einziges Video gedreht, aber das Ganze kann schon Probe gespielt werden. Das kann in die QA, also in die Testabteilung. Da kommt dann wieder Feedback zurück. Da kommen neue Vorschläge, was man noch machen könnte, Handlungsmöglichkeiten und so weiter. Und so wird das Ganze immer ausgefeilter. Und Morrison sagt, das mal als Dialog zu hören, so am Stück, auch wenn es noch so schlecht vorgelesen war von den Kollegen, das waren keine Talente dabei. Das half trotzdem ihm wiederum als Autor zu merken, was funktioniert und was funktioniert nicht. Was klingt natürlich im Dialog, was nicht. Weil es ist halt nochmal was anderes, das zu hören, als es auf dem Papier zu sehen. Und Morrison beschreibt diese ganze Zeit als sehr aufregend, aber auch beängstigend, denn da ist ja ein Elefant am Horizont und dieser Elefant ist der Beginn der Dreharbeiten. Denn die werden parallel dazu vorbereitet, und zwar beim Filmstudio. Und dieses Filmstudio heißt Vixen Films. Ja, ich weiß, das ist für Deutsche ein Wort, bei dem man grinsen muss, aber im Englischsprachigen heißt es einfach Füchsin. Beam Software hat sich die rausgesucht, die haben mehrere Studios angesehen und die mochten Vixen, die mochten vor allen Dingen die federführenden Leute dort. Das war die Regisseurin Joe Lane und der Producer Stuart Menzies. Die beiden werden dann auch federführend mitarbeiten an den Filmaufnahmen von Puppenperlen und Pistolen. Vixen ist damals, glaube ich, noch ein ziemlich neues Studio. Es ist schwer, darüber was rauszufinden. Und Morrison hat jetzt nicht so viel erzählt, außer dass die hauptsächlich ihre Erfahrungen in Werbedrehs haben. Die haben auch ein Standbein in Fernsehdokumentationen, aber davon zu dem Zeitpunkt, wo hier diese Kollaboration entsteht, noch nicht so viel. Auch die Joe Lane ist noch eine sehr junge Regisseurin. Das müsste eines ihrer ersten Regieprojekte gewesen sein. Nun, wie gesagt, parallel zu den Arbeiten bei Beam Software bereiten die nun wiederum die Filmaufnahmen vor. Die machen Testaufnahmen, zum Beispiel eine davon in Louises Apartment. Da ist das auch noch eine andere Darstellerin für diese Testaufnahme, noch nicht die Finale. Und sie lernen also auf ihrer Seite Dinge darüber, wie so ein Video produziert werden muss für diesen speziellen Anwendungsfall, für so ein Spiel auf CD-ROM. Das geht zum Beispiel um die Qualität. Ja, das Video wird ja hochauflösend natürlich aufgenommen, oder der Film wird hochauflösend aufgenommen, aber das wird ja am Ende dann ein auf 256 Farben und die grobe VGA-Auflösung oder Super VGA-Auflösung runtergerechnetes Ding sein, das hochgradig komprimiert wird und dann sieht das ganz anders aus. Muster auf Kleider zum Beispiel werden auf einmal völlig verrauscht oder wie sie feststellen, die Lippenstiftfarbe zum Beispiel bei den Frauen spielt eine Rolle, denn wenn das Bild sehr farbreich ist, die Szene sehr farbig ist und das Ganze wird dann runtergerechnet auf 256 Farben, dann kann die Lippenstiftfarbe auf einmal verrutschen. Dann kann ein roter Lippenstift auf einmal grün werden. Also Sie müssen auf solche Dinge achten. Sie müssen auf die Farbauswahl achten. Sie müssen gucken, wie ist das mit der Ego-Perspektive? Wie machen wir das, dass die Hände zu sehen sind, dass die Perspektive aber noch richtig aussieht? Die ganzen Darsteller müssen darauf geprägt werden, dass sie in die Kamera sprechen. Das machen Schauspieler ja normalerweise nicht. Die vermeiden ja, um Gottes Willen, in die Kamera zu gucken. Und hier müssen sie es aber. Eine der Inspirationen dafür war übrigens ein Schwarz-Weiß-Film aus dem Jahr 1947, The Lady in the Lake. Das ist auch so ein Noir-Krimi, das basiert auf einem Roman von Raymond Chandler. Und der ist komplett in Ego-Perspektive gefilmt. Ein Kuriosum. Warum eigentlich die Ego-Perspektive für das Spiel, wollten wir auch wissen. Das wusste Morrison nicht mehr so genau, wie sie diese Entscheidung getroffen haben, aber er glaubt, es war eigentlich von Anfang an klar. Das war nie ein großer Diskussionspunkt. Er meint, die Chandler-Romane sind auch in der Ich-Perspektive geschrieben, vielleicht kam es daher, aber genau wusste er es nicht mehr. Nun, was Vixen Films parallel auch macht, ist ein Kostenplan. Der Producer, Stuart Menzies, der nimmt das Skript und rechnet dann mal alle Drehorte und alle Darsteller zusammen und sagt, so, hier ist das Budget, das wir dafür brauchen. Und dann schaut sich das Management bei Beam Software das an und sagt, nein. Dann kommt der Producer bei Beam, David Giles, der zuständig ist für das Projekt. Der kommt dann also zu Mark Morrison und sagt ihm, sorry, aber du musst 1/3 rausschmeißen. Dampf mal deine ganze Geschichte, dein ganzes Konzept um 1/3 ein. Ja, und auch da, sagt Morrison, hat ihm wieder seine Rollenspielerfahrung geholfen. Er geht da ganz pragmatisch ran. Muss das Abenteuer halt verändert werden. Dann streicht er ein paar kleinere Charaktere raus und hier mal ein Handlungsstrang und da die dazugehörigen Gegenstände. Und am Ende sagt er, es ist sogar noch besser geworden. Wir haben das jetzt nicht explizit nachgefragt, aber ich kann mir vorstellen, dass das der Grund ist, warum es Orte im Spiel gibt, die auf der Karte noch eingezeichnet sind, wie zum Beispiel die First National Bank, die man aber nicht mehr besuchen kann. Gut möglich, dass das vielleicht mal ein Schauplatz war, an dem mehr hätte passieren sollen. Nun, dann kommt also der Tag der Dreharbeiten oder es nähert sich. Vixen schickt vorher Fotos von den Drehorten. Die sind übrigens alle in Melbourne. Also das Spiel spielt ja in Los Angeles, aber nichts von dem, was wir sehen, ist tatsächlich in Los Angeles aufgenommen. Melbourne ist eine wohlhabende Stadt. Das war mal eine Goldgräberstadt. Lief das ganze Gold von Victoria durch. Da wurden viele imposante Gebäude errichtet. Da war viel repräsentative Architektur. Es gibt auch keine Studiodrehs. Also es wird kein Studio dafür angemietet, sondern das sind alles Schauplätze vor Ort, wo die Außen- und Innenaufnahmen gemacht werden. Also da wählt man passende Gebäude nach dem Look oder auch die Räume nach dem Look und teilweise werden die dann ausgeräumt und dann von Bühnenbildnern passend ausgestattet. Also die Innenausstattung, das ist nicht unbedingt original. Aber die ganzen Gebäude, die ganzen Außenaufnahmen, das ist alles Melbourne. Am Casting war Mike Morrison seiner Erinnerung nach nicht beteiligt, aber da sind bekannte Persönlichkeiten aus dem australischen Fernsehen dabei. Das sind jetzt Leute, die man hierzulande vermutlich eher nicht kennt, aber so jemand wie die Darstellerin von Carol Klein, also unsere Auftraggeberin, die ist gespielt von Tiffany Lamb. Und die sagt, Mike Morrison war zu der Zeit ein riesiger Star aus der TV-Soap-Opera Neighbours, Nachbarn. Die, glaube ich, kennt man auch bei uns, kann man auch mal gehört haben. Kylie Minogue zum Beispiel ist da groß geworden. Also die Tiffany Lamb hat da in 10 Episoden mitgespielt. Ich wage zu bezweifeln, dass das reicht, um ein riesiger Star zu sein. Aber gehen wir mal davon aus, dass Australier sie kennen. Falls hier irgendein Australier zuhört, der das bestätigen kann oder widersprechen, dann würde ich mich darüber freuen. Jedenfalls hatte Mike Morrison auch spekuliert, und das halte ich auch nicht für unwahrscheinlich, dass die Darsteller, dass die das vielleicht sogar ein bisschen günstiger gemacht haben, als sie es normalerweise für Dreharbeiten machen würden, weil die auch das Gefühl hatten, da kriegen wir vielleicht den Fuß in die Tür für das nächste große Ding. Drehs für Spiele, vielleicht wird das hier die nächste große Industrie. Ist dann ja nicht so gekommen. Jedenfalls haben die Dreharbeiten insgesamt 3 Wochen gedauert und Mark Morrison war jeden Tag am Set und hat nachts Szenen umgeschrieben. Wenn da im Set zum Beispiel interessante Gegenstände waren, die die Bühnendekorateure dahingestellt haben oder die schon da waren an diesem Ort, wo Scott Anger vielleicht einen Satz dazu sagen sollte, dann hat er das noch reingeschrieben und solche Sachen. Und am nächsten Tag haben die Schauspieler dann die ganzen geänderten Szenen auf grünem Papier bekommen, um zu sehen, dass da was anders ist. Und in der 2. Woche der Dreharbeiten sagt Mark Morrison, sei dann der Producer zu ihm gekommen und hätte freundlich gesagt, Mark, also diese vielen Änderungen jeden Tag, das macht's den Schauspielern schon sehr schwer. Können wir das vielleicht irgendwie eindämmen? Und Morrison sagte, er habe sich davon aber nicht abhalten lassen. Also er hat wohl auch ein bisschen Micromanagement-mäßig mit eingegriffen am Set. Er hat uns zum Beispiel erzählt, dass er am Set von Louise' Apartment, wo das dann in durchwühltem Zustand ist, die Idee bekommen hat, dass da doch eigentlich Glasscherben rumliegen müssten. Da müsste doch Glas eingeschlagen worden sein. Und dann sind die Setdesigner losgegangen, haben Glasscherben organisiert, haben die da verteilt am Boden. Na, und als sie dann am Ende die Filmaufnahmen angeguckt haben oder die Videos im Spiel, haben sie festgestellt, naja, sieht man überhaupt nichts davon. Nun gut, wer noch mit am Set war der Producer von Beam Software, David Giles, und er und Morrison da sind eigentlich vor allem darum, auf die Kontinuität zu achten. Ja, das ist eigentlich deren Aufgabe, sicherzustellen, dass zum Beispiel in den Videos nie Gegenstände zu sehen sind, die der Spieler mitnehmen kann. Weil wenn man die da sehen könnte, müsste man das Video ja zweimal drehen. Einmal mit Gegenstand, einmal ohne Gegenstand. Deswegen achten sie peinlichst genau darauf, dass sowas nicht vorkommt. An den Drehorten werden übrigens auch Fotos gemacht, nämlich die Fotos, die dann die Szenenbilder im Spiel sind, da wo das eigentliche Spiel stattfindet. Ja, und als es zu der Aufnahme kommt, wo der Gabelstapler aufgenommen wird, der Motor des Gabelstaplers, wo man dieses Besteck reinstecken kann, um die Kabel zu überbrücken, da wird also der David Giles offensichtlich ganz nervös, weil es da so viele Kombinationsmöglichkeiten gibt mit diesen Besteckdingern, die man dabei hat. Und ob das da wohl alles bedacht ist. Und dann erzählt der Morrison, dass er ihn beruhigen musste und der Giles hat ein Notizbuch dabei, sein Little Book of Worries, kleines Buch der Sorgen nennt er das, und da musste der Morrison reinschreiben, lieber David, das Gabelstaplerrätsel wird funktionieren mit Unterschrift und Datum. Und Morrison sagt, der Giles hätte ihn sicher mit dem Buch totgeprügelt, wenn das nicht aufgegangen wäre, wenn sie nicht an alles gedacht hätten. Aber es wurde an jede Kombination gedacht. Nun, typischerweise sind sie so einen halben Tag pro Location, dann müssen die Aufnahmen fertig sein und es wird weitergezogen. Es gibt nach den ganzen Filmaufnahmen dann noch separate Tonaufnahmen, da kommen die ganzen Darsteller dann nochmal in ein Tonstudio und dann werden ihre Dialoge aufgenommen. Ja, und als das alles im Kasten ist, muss das auch alles passen. Ja, also da kann man dann nicht mehr viel verändern. Es gibt deswegen auch nur sehr, sehr wenige Dinge, die dann nachträglich noch geändert wurden. Eine der Sachen ist zum Beispiel eines der 3 Enden, die man haben kann, nämlich das beste Ende, das, wenn man so möchte, also das, wo Scott Anger zu seiner Auftraggeberin, zur Carol, nach Oregon fährt, das war eigentlich nicht im Skript. Das haben sie nachträglich eingefügt, weil der Morrison dachte, na, wir müssen doch noch irgendwie ein weniger düsteres Ende haben, ein freundlicheres Ende. Und diese Szene, die man da sieht, das ist ja, wie Anger mit dem Auto rumfährt durch die Pampa, die wurde für was anderes aufgenommen, nämlich für die Fahrt zur Jagdhütte. Da sieht man es ja auch, das ist also quasi Recycling von einer anderen Szene und dann haben sie halt noch einen Voice-Over-Text dazu bei den Sprachaufnahmen aufgenommen und dann war das im Kasten. Ja, und es war natürlich auch irgendwann klar, dass das Ganze auf 2 CDs kommen würde. Und da wurde die Entscheidung getroffen bei Beam, dass das streng aufgeteilt wird. Also, dass hier kein Hin- und Herspringen zwischen den CDs passieren wird, dass hier den Spielern nicht zugemutet werden soll, die CD zu wechseln, immer wieder hin und her, sondern dass das ein harter Cut sein wird. Das heißt, die Handlung der CD 1 muss abgeschlossen sein und dann geht's weiter mit CD 2. Ja, und das ist der Grund, warum es da keine Rückkehrmöglichkeit gibt, warum auch das Inventar geleert wird und vor allen Dingen, warum es das Zeitlimit gibt am Anfang. Diese 3 Tage, die Scott Anger hat am Anfang, um den Fall zu lösen, das ist das Zeitlimit für die CD1. Am Ende von diesen 3 Tagen muss die CD1 abgeschlossen sein. Dann kommt man auf die CD2 und dann kommt der restliche Teil des Spiels. Das ist natürlich nicht so glücklich, aber das sind ein paar so Entscheidungen, die halt einfach fallen. Es gibt auch einige ganz bewusste, absichtliche Entscheidungen, die vielleicht nicht so glücklich waren. Mark Morrison zum Beispiel wollte explizit nicht, dass Dinge wiederholt werden, um die Immersion nicht zu brechen. Also deswegen wiederholt kein Gesprächspartner jemals einen Satz. Du hörst die Sätze immer nur einmal. Deswegen werden Videoszenen nur einmal gezeigt und das war's. Was dazu führt, dass wir als Spieler echt gut aufpassen müssen. Also für den Spieler wäre es vielleicht besser, das nochmal anhören zu können. Aber hier war die künstlerische Entscheidung, nein, das soll realistisch sein in der Hinsicht. Ja, und was ist mit dem Inventarlimit und mit dem Speichersystem, mit dem wir so gehadert haben, dass man immer wieder zurückfahren muss ins Büro? Die Entscheidung, warum das Inventar jetzt begrenzt ist und warum es diese 3 Inventare gibt, mit dem Kofferraum und der Schublade und dem Mantel oder dem Anzug von Anger, seinen Taschen, das wusste Morrison nicht mehr. Keine Ahnung. Das Speichersystem dagegen, das leitet er daraus ab, dass sie wollten, dass der Spieler ins Büro zurückkehrt. Weil da Dinge passieren, die relevant sind. Da kommt der Vermieter und will sein Geld, da kommt der Erpresserbrief an, da wird auf Anger geschossen und so weiter. Also der Spieler muss immer wieder ins Büro zurück und Morrison meint, eine der Dinge, wie sie das bewerkstelligten wollten, war zu sagen, na gut, du kannst halt nur hier speichern. Ja, dann wollten wir natürlich auch noch wissen, wie erfolgreich das Spiel dann war. Ja, und Morrison sagte, ja, das hatte natürlich seine Probleme. Also vor allen Dingen ist es dann 1995 in einer Zeit rausgekommen, wo Spieler schon festgestellt hatten, dass sie das vielleicht gar nicht so toll finden mit diesem Full-Motion-Video in Adventures und wo die 3D-Grafik schon am Horizont war. Tomb Raider war jetzt zwar noch nicht draußen, es kam erst 1996, aber war schon angekündigt. Morrison meint, eigentlich war das Spiel bei seiner Veröffentlichung schon veraltet, war eigentlich schon klar, dass das eben nicht die Zukunft sein wird. Und dementsprechend war es also auch kein kommerzieller Erfolg. Es war auch kein Kritikererfolg übrigens. Das hat Wertungen im 60er, 70er Bereich bekommen, hier in Deutschland teilweise sogar noch deutlich drunter. Was ich jetzt persönlich, das ist meine persönliche Meinung, wo ich sagen muss, das ist nicht gerechtfertigt, das ist ein gutes Spiel. Aber es war ja, wie gesagt, kein Erfolg und das dämpft auch das weitere Engagement des Publishers Philips. Das Spiel kam fürs CDI und für den PC raus und Mark Morrison meint sich zu erinnern, dass Philips die ebenfalls schon fertiggestellte Macintosh-Version dann gar nicht mehr auf den Markt gebracht habe. Da bin ich mir nicht so sicher. Es gibt im Netz zumindest Fotos und CD-Images der Mac-Versionen, wobei das natürlich auch von einem Pressemuster stammen kann oder vielleicht war es auch nur eine sehr kleine Auflage. Was dagegen sicher ist, ist, dass das Spiel keinen Nachfolger bekommen hat. Der war aber durchaus geplant. Auf der australischen Box des Spiels, und auch nur auf der, steht unten drunter noch der Satz A Scott Anger Adventure Game, also ein Scott Anger Spiel. Was sie deswegen draufgeschrieben haben, weil sie wollten das als Serie aufziehen. Also Beam wollte, dass es weitere Scott Anger Spiele geben sollte. Und es war auch ein Nachfolger geplant und da hat Mike Morrison auch dran gearbeitet. Wurde da auch bezahlt dafür, schon mal erste Skriptgedanken sich zu machen für diesen Nachfolger. Der Titel sollte lauten A String of Pearls, also eine Perlenkette, eine Perlenschnur. Das war also zumindest mal in der Konzeptionsphase, aber da hat Philips dann den Stecker gezogen und haben gesagt, nee, wir steigen aus, wir finanzieren das nicht mehr und dementsprechend hat auch Beam Software diesen Plan nicht weiterverfolgt. Und das ist die Geschichte von Puppen, Perlen und Pistolen von Mark Morrison, der in dieser Zeit Freelancer war. Der hat sich dann aber 1998 anstellen lassen bei Beam Software, hat da in Death Cars gearbeitet, einem Rennspiel, Action-Rennspiel und war eine ganze Weile bei Beam. Das wurde dann von Orphogram gekauft, die dann später zu Atari wurden. Und Morrison hat noch für mehr als ein Jahrzehnt Industriekarriere gemacht bei verschiedenen Studios, bevor er dann wieder zurückgegangen ist in seine alte Leidenschaft, nämlich als Autor für Pen-and-Paper-Rollenspiele. Und das macht er unter anderem neben anderen Dingen auch noch heute. So, das war meine Zusammenfassung. Ich fand das sehr interessante Erkenntnisse zur Entstehungsgeschichte von Puppen, Perlen und Pistolen. Ich hoffe, euch ging es auch so. Und damit ist die Staffel nun endgültig zu Ende. Und auch diese Folge. Und ich wünsche euch noch einen wunderbaren Rest des Tages. Bis dann.